Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host Mitch, glad to have you here. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about Commander on a budget. Today we have an episode of Quest for Quarters. On episodes like these, I take you through underrated budget cards that you should be considering when you're building your decks. For these episodes, not only does every card have to be under $1, but they also need to be used in less than 4% of eligible decks on EDH Rec. This show and episodes like this one are possible because of viewers like you. So if you're looking for some easy ways to help support the show, make sure you like this episode and share it with friends. And make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Thank you to everyone who's already purchased our merchandise, it really does help support the channel. Another easy way to support this channel is by using our TCG Player affiliate links. So make sure that you're looking for those links in the description whenever you're buying a deck or just individual cards. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. Today's first underrated Quest for Quarters card is Reap. Currently it's just 34 cents and is seeing play in just 150 decks. Reap is an instant that costs 1 and a green. It says return up to X target cards from your graveyard to your hand, where X is the number of black permanents target opponent controls as you cast a spell. So we've definitely gone over how powerful recursion spells can be, and this one is very unique. It is definitely circumstantial because it does depend on one of your opponents having black permanents. If no one's playing black, this isn't going to do anything. But even if just one player is playing black, this card can be huge. So it does have a low floor, but also an extremely high ceiling. Now, we've talked about this on a previous episode, but let's talk about the standard rate for recursion in green. The card Regrowth is pretty much the base level of recursion. It already sees play in 7% of eligible decks, and that number's just going to keep growing since it was recently reprinted. It costs 2 mana, and at sorcery speed, it's going to get you back 1 card from your graveyard to your hand. So to start, paying 2 mana for 1 card back is what's to be expected. Now, we also talked about how this doesn't always scale at that rate, so go ahead and check out that last Quest for Quarters episode if you want to see more on that. But for the purposes of this episode, let's compare Regrowth with Reap. Regrowth guarantees that at sorcery speed, you're going to get 1 card for 2 mana. While Reap has no such guarantee, if there's just 1 black permanent out there, it's more effective than Regrowth. If there was a Regrowth at instant speed, it would see a ton of play. And that's basically what Reap is, but with even more upside. Chances are by the time you actually want to play one of these recursion spells, at least one of your opponents will have a black permanent on the board. For argument's sake, let's say that 9 out of 10 games you have at least one opponent that has black on their deck. If you had a much better version of Regrowth that worked 9 out of 10 times, wouldn't you take that? And let's say that even just a few of those times, one of your opponents is playing a mono-black deck. In those situations, Reap can probably get your entire graveyard back. In 2 mana instant speed, bringing your entire graveyard back to your hand is absolutely unheard of. Praetor's Council is seeing play in 6% of decks, and it costs 8 mana, and it's at sorcery speed. Now on top of that, it also gives you no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. But if I'm choosing between a 2 mana instant and an 8 mana sorcery, there's no comparison. No maximum hand size does not equate to that difference. Now again, this is the highest ceiling that Reap has, getting your entire yard back for just 2 mana. Now of course this is the best case scenario, and it's not always going to happen that way. The most likely scenario is that it falls somewhere in between. Most of the time when you want to cast this, you're going to have at least one opponent that has multiple black permanents, and getting back multiple cards for 2 mana at instant speed is absolutely unheard of. The closest comparison to this card might be Nostalgic Dreams. Currently it sees about 3 times as much play as Reap. It also has a converted mana cost of 2, but to get cards back with it, you have to discard cards. This can definitely be effective in the right deck, but there's obviously a cost to it. Nostalgic Dreams will help you get back the cards that you need, but it's not putting you ahead on cards. There just really aren't any other recursion spells out there that are as cheap and efficient as Reap. And in fact, there just aren't many recursion spells that are instant speed as is. One of the very few out there is Night Charm, which costs 3 mana and gets you 1 card back. Now it's definitely a very effective card with 3 relevant modes, but even if you took out those other 2 modes, I don't think its converted mana cost would change. Again, the going rate for recursion is 2 mana for 1 card back at sorcery speed. Reap has a low floor, I will definitely give you that. If none of your opponents are playing black, it's going to be a dead card in your deck. But the vast majority of the time, you're going to have at least one opponent that has 1 black permanent, if not more. So most of the time, this is going to be the most efficient recursion spell in Magic. And there will be those times when one of your opponents has a board full of black permanents. And when that happens, this card is absolutely insane. It's incredible to me that this card is only seeing play in 150 decks. This card very well might be the best recursion spell out there. I think people are far too afraid of it being a dead card in their deck. So I urge you to take a chance on this extremely underrated card and see how it plays out for you. But now let's move on to our second underrated Quest for Quarters card of the day with Rush of Knowledge. Currently it's seeing play in 804 decks and is just 10 cents. It's a sorcery that costs 4 and a blue, and it says draw cards equal to the highest converted mana cost among permanents you control. Now this card is at sorcery speed, so it has that going against it. But it has the potential to draw you a ton of cards for just 5 mana. Let's check out a comparable card with Tidings. At 5 mana, you're drawing a guaranteed 4 cards. Now obviously this card isn't blowing anyone's mind, but it's seeing more play than Rush of Knowledge. Now Rush of Knowledge does not fit into every deck, but there are plenty of decks out there that run cards with a higher converted mana cost than 4. This is especially true with pretty much any deck that has a decently high-costed commander. In fact, more than half the commanders out there have a converted mana cost of at least 5. Now, you obviously can't guarantee that your commander's always going to be on the board when you cast this, but it definitely has a ton of upside with a high-costed commander like Memnarch. If this resolves with Memnarch on the field, it's going to draw you 7 cards for 5 mana, and that's a fantastic rate. Let's look at a similar card but in a different color with Soul's Majesty. It costs 4 and a green and it says, draw cards equal to the power of target creature you control. Now of course these are not directly comparable cards. Blue has a ton of more options to draw than green does. But putting that aside, let's just look at the cards themselves. They both can draw you a ton of cards for 5 mana at sorcery speed. The biggest difference between these two is that Soul's Majesty has to target. That means this spell can be quite risky and can actually do nothing if that creature's removed. Rush of Knowledge doesn't target, so even if your highest converted mana cost permanent is removed, you're still going to get some value out of it. You might not draw as many cards, but you're still going to draw some. In many ways, this is more like a card like Rishkar's Expertise, which is currently seeing play in 13% of eligible decks. Essentially, it's a Soul's Majesty that costs 1 more and doesn't target. Now on top of that, you get to cast a card with converted mana cost of 5 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. This part is obviously very valuable as well, but I think this card would still see a good amount of play even if that part was removed. Like Rush of Knowledge, it can draw you a ton of cards in the right deck, and even if your opponents interfere, it can still provide you value. For argument's sake though, let's compare Rush of Knowledge to a blue instant speed draw spell like Stroke of Genius. Currently it costs over $3 and sees play in 5% of eligible decks. It's an instant that costs X2 in a blue and it says target player draws X cards. Now I'm definitely not saying that Rush of Knowledge is better, it's not. Instant speed draw is always going to have an advantage over sorcery speed draw. And Stroke of Genius doesn't have a limit on how many cards it can draw you or another player. But comparing these two cards heads up at the same amount of mana, Rush of Knowledge can provide you more value. Again, in that Memnarch deck for 5 mana, it can draw you 7 cards. At 5 mana, Stroke of Genius is only drawing you 2. Again, it's not the easiest thing when it comes to trying to compare sorcery speed and instant speed draw. There's definitely a premium when it comes to drawing cards at instant speed. But sorcery speed draw spells like Rush of Knowledge that have a high upside should not be ignored. It's definitely not meant for every deck, but there are plenty of decks out there that aren't playing it right now and it could really shine in those decks. Now it's time to move on to our third Quest Recorders card with Flicker Form. Currently it's only 48 cents and sees play in 2% of eligible decks. It's an aura that costs 1 and a white and it says Enchant Creature. 2 white, exile enchanted creature and all auras attached to it. At the beginning of the next end step, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. If you do, return the other cards exiled this way to the battlefield under their owner's control attached to that creature. Essentially this is a big block of text that is actually pretty simple in practice. You can flicker your creature and auras attached to it. Now there aren't too many things out there that actually let you do anything like this. Let's say that you're playing in a Voltron style strategy like Shram. The goal of that deck is to suit Shram up with a ton of auras and just swing out. If you go to blink or flicker him with normal means, you lose all those auras attached to him. That's why you can't use a card like Cloud Shift in that deck. Flicker Form is a repeatable way to protect something like Shram without losing anything. The only other real comparable card to Flicker Form is Vanishing. By paying blue, the enchanted creature phases out. Now phasing out is different than flickering or blinking, but in both situations with Vanishing and Flicker Form, you get to keep your auras on your creature. Now the thing that makes Flicker Form more effective in my opinion is ETBs. When you phase back in with Vanishing, you don't get any enter the battlefield triggers. When you blink or flicker a creature though, you do. So Flicker Form not only protects your creature, but it can also be a way to abuse enter the battlefield triggers with it. And repeatable ways to do that are extremely valuable in Commander. Perhaps the most abusable one is Deadeye Navigator. Currently it's over $4 and sees play in 10% of eligible decks. Essentially it lets you pay 1 in a blue to blink another creature. Now this effect is different than Flicker Form because that creature comes right back. That's definitely better when it comes to abusing ETBs, but it can definitely be worse when it comes to actually protecting the creature. If someone casts a board wipe, Flicker Form can be definitely more effective at saving the creature. Flicker Form is a very versatile card and can be used defensively and offensively. Any kind of a Voltron style deck that revolves around auras can really benefit from this. Or decks that revolve around commanders that have some really explosive ETBs can use this as well. It's a form of protection as well as repeatable value, and there just aren't many cards like it. Now it's not for every deck, but it should be seeing more play than 2%. And at 48 cents, it can definitely fit in a lot of budgets. My final underrated Quest Recorders card today is Inquisitors Foil. Currently it's only 25 cents and sees play in 1% of eligible decks. It's an equipment that costs 2 and it costs 2 to equip. It says if equipped creature would deal combat damage, it deals double that damage instead. And if another creature would deal combat damage to equipped creature, it deals double that damage to equipped creature instead. This is another card that's fantastic for Voltron style decks. The upside of this card is huge. Once it's on the field, it doubles up your commander's damage for just 2 mana. Now there obviously is a downside that your commander's going to take twice as much damage. But with a Voltron style deck, you've got plenty of ways to get around that anyways. Your commander may have evasion or first strike or even indestructible to make sure that they don't die from combat damage. A similar card that's seeing more than twice as much play is Fire Shrieker. It costs 3 and 2 to equip and it says equipped creature has double strike. Now Fire Shrieker does cost 1 more to cast, but there is no downside like Inquisitor's Foil has. It may be better in more situations, but in Voltron style decks you're usually not worried about your commander getting hit. And these cards work fantastically with each other. When put on the same creature, it essentially quadruples your creature's damage. So even if your commander just has 6 power, with both of these on, your commander becomes a one-shot kill. Unlike Fire Shrieker, Inquisitor's Foil works with anything that grants double strike. So if your commander already has Battle Mastery on, Fire Shrieker is pretty much useless, whereas Inquisitor's Foil works with every single one of them. Let's look at another equipment that's commonly used in Voltron-style decks. Blackblade Reforged is an equipment that costs 2 and it costs 3 to equip to a legendary creature. It's going to give that creature +1/+1 for each land that you control. Blackblade Reforged is a fantastic card. It doesn't have that downside like Inquisitor's Foil has, but it also does cost 1 more to equip and it takes longer to get going. With a Voltron style deck, you're usually trying to kill as quickly as possible. Inquisitors Foil scales with the power level of your creature. Blackblade Reforged scales with your lands. In those types of decks, it's more often than not easier to scale your creature's power level than your land count. A final card to compare this to is Dictate of the Twin Gods. Now these are not directly comparable cards, but like Inquisitor's Foil, it has a similar upside and a downside. It essentially doubles up all damage for everyone. Now even though this card can have a huge downside, people are still playing it. In fact, it's seeing play in 5% of eligible decks. Inquisitor's Foil also has a downside, but again, we can mitigate that. If we can ensure that our commander gets through, there is no downside. And Voltron style decks excel at that. There are plenty of times when your opponents think that they're safe, and then you double up your commander's power out of nowhere with this. Casting this for 2 and equipping it for 2 to double up your commander's power is extremely efficient. It has a ton of synergy with a lot of the cards in your Voltron style deck that you're already going to be playing. The positives definitely outweigh the negatives with this card, and it's a very cheap budget card that you can pick up right now for 25 cents. And with that, our show is coming to a close, but I really want to hear about your thoughts on these picks, so why don't you let me know in the comments below. And make sure that you're following us on social media for more updates and sneak peeks on future episodes. Links to our social media accounts can be found in the description. Also in the description below is a link to the Commander's Quarters Patreon page, and I just want to say a quick thank you to the patrons who have subscribed so far. There are many benefits to being a patron for the Commander's Quarters, including being able to vote on future commanders for deck techs. There's even a general level tier where you get your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you. I truly couldn't do this without all of your support, so from the bottom of my heart, thank you. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. And while you're at it, check out some of our other episodes on budget deck techs, Quest for Quarters episodes, Commander topics, and Creators Quarters. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again, and have a good one.